Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kira Scott and I'm the Marketing and Events Executive for the Entrepreneurship Centre. If you haven't worked with us before, let me briefly introduce what we do. So the Entrepreneurship Centre is committed to fostering entrepreneurship both within the university and within the wider community. We support individuals at every stage of their entrepreneurial journey, from helping aspiring entrepreneurs get started to assisting early stage ventures and supporting the growth of small and medium-sized enterprises. By connecting industry with our staff and student community, we aim to create a dynamic, thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. We do this through a variety of programmes, one-on-one support, and events to provide you with tools, resources, and guidance needed to bring ideas and research to life, as well as develop successful ventures and create a lasting impact. If any of this resonates with you, or if you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out to us after the session. I will be emailing out the contact details for both the Entrepreneurship Centre and Joe at the end. Before I pass things over to Joe, who will introduce himself, tell us a bit more about how he can help with this journey and start the session, I'd like to remind you that if you do experience any technical issues, please do let us know via the chat. There will also be time for a Q&A at the end, so please feel free to add your questions into the chat throughout the session. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kira. So welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time. By way of introduction, I'm Joe. I'm the Finance Director of St Andrews Innovation Limited. I'm a chartered accountant by trade. Part of what I'm here to talk about is obviously how wonderful chartered accountants are, how they're good looking, handsome, funny, creative, and dispel all those myths. You may or may not be aware, but the university has a group of subsidiary companies for commercial activities. St Andrews Innovation Limited is the top company responsible for managing the group. Within the group, we have a very imaginatively named company, University of St Andrews Consulting Services Limited. We use this to facilitate staff consultancy, and yeah, that's the focus of what I'm here to talk about today. I'll put you all at ease a little bit. I've not prepared any slides. I don't really always think it helps to have slides. I think a lot of the time people just want to speak and hear about things rather than looking at funny charts and graphs. I'm just going to talk the why, the how, and the what of consultancy, really. We'll then be joined by Sarah Marsden from International Relations. She's been very successful in her consultancy endeavours, and then as Kira said, we'll have time for Q&A towards the end. As a short explanation, continuing the introduction, the university published its consultancy policy back in February 2022. Much like Subsidiary Group, I'm sure some of you won't actually even be aware of it. We've not pushed particularly hard to market it, but it's something we want to change and kind of let everyone know about it as an opportunity. There's more detail here, but I'll try and keep things short and succinct without rambling on too many tangents. And as Kira said, again, at the end of the session, she'll be sharing my contact details and we'll have a link to the consultancy policy for reference. So the first question to cover is why consultancy? And I guess I kind of have to define a little bit about what consultancy is. So when we talk about it, the simple way I think of it is whether we're actually creating any IP, any new novel information. If we're creating IP for our own use, then it's quite likely it's going to be research work. But if we're not, and it's producing written reports, it's routine analysis, or maybe there's no reporting involved at all, it's a pretty good chance it's going to be consultancy work. The best way I can give an example would be the difference between using lab equipment for some real cutting edge work to push the boundaries of knowledge. That would quite clearly be research. And you could compare that to using that same lab equipment to just undertake routine analysis. So maybe giving independent verification for a client that they've produced the correct chemical compound from their manufacturing process. Something like that would just easily fall within consultancy. If you think it's research, then it's best to reach out to RBD. If you think it's consultancy, just get in touch with me. Whichever route you take, though, we'll take a look at things, help guide you through the process, what it actually is at the end of the day, and get you talking to the right people to take things forward. And then following on the actual why should you care about consultancy? It's more on your to-do list. Everyone's busy right now. The process is open to all university staff, and the most glaringly obvious reason is that you can financially benefit from this. Beyond that, it can be a really strong stepping stone to bigger things and an excellent opportunity to grow your networks and relationships with industry and your colleagues. God, we've still got people joining. This is, how many people are we up to now, Kira? 55. I don't think I've ever spoken to this many people. I'm sure half of you won't be listening. I fully don't expect you to, don't worry. So carrying on, if we talk about the opportunities themselves, actually identifying the opportunities is a key challenge. In reality, a large part of it is being aware of the conversations you're having with your networks and making the link that you can actually help solve problems. Some of the examples of work that we've had staff undertake as consultancy are probably useful to point out to kind of show where this materializes. As I mentioned above, there's been a lot of routine testing using lab equipment. Clients might need access to the equipment, it's too expensive for them to buy, and they don't have the expertise to actually run it. Expert advisory services, so we have world-leading researchers at the university and incredibly talented people. The insights and advice that they can actually give can be invaluable. And this has ranged from everything from startup opportunities, just fledgling, through to governmental agencies, large companies, everywhere in between to support any sort of development or even public policy. Following on from that, there's also training opportunities. And again, it's a wide range of things that can occur. So we've had corporate management training, including leadership. We've had lab equipment training because the companies have decided to actually go and buy the equipment themselves, but still don't know how to use it. Workshops for specialist computer program tools that have been generated and methods for applying them. There's a whole range. I mean, you all have an incredible wealth of knowledge, skills, and talents that can be applied. And something else that's a bit of a wild card one that you wouldn't even really think of as consultancy is media work. So we've even had a couple of instances where experts have been involved in TV productions. I won't name names, but there was someone involved in a documentary on the Loch Ness Monster. So there's always opportunities. And finding them, a lot of the time it can really just be a simple statement of, I can help you with that. Just simply saying those words can open doors to the kind of projects there as you're speaking to the people that you're generally speaking to. They might just be venting, but you can just say, I can help you with that. And then that just can lead down a whole avenue of paid work. Alongside your networks, there are requests for proposals as another avenue that can be approached. Admittedly, it can be a little bit difficult to keep on top of those, but work with RBD from their awareness of situations can often help with that. It might seem intimidating to go through yourself, so something else to be aware of is that you can actually partner and collaborate with other institutions to do this. You know, I'm not going to talk to you about your networks. I mean, you'll speak to colleagues across a whole wide range of other universities and institutions, and they can all work with you on things. A prime example we had was Heriot Watt were leading a larger bid that included a subcontract to one of our staff members. There was quite a lot of admin and preparation work required. It was a high-tech client with onerous supplier setup requirements, but by partnering, Heriot Watt were actually able to take on the brunt of that while we supported. And the fantastic thing about that was it actually led on to a significant second phase, which was a research project. So it's this natural progression. You know, foot in the door consultancy work might not be massive, but it gets that relationship building and building, could lead on to much bigger things as everyone develops together. Another example we've had recently is where one of our directors of impact was able to use his network to bring in consultancy funding to, in fact, subcontract to staff within and out with his school. He's part of a national institute who were looking to fund work to support their policies through policy review. They didn't have a clear access route to people, but by this individual bringing that work in through our straightforward route, it really just made an easy way past that choke point. Something we're going to look to in the future is that as we grow our consultancy offering, part of what we want to do is turn things around and actively market our services to industry. A lot of what's happened so far has been our staff have gone out and found the problems, but we want to maybe try and focus on that as well and speak to industry more and bring their problems to us. So what we'd love to do is have a bank of experts and staff who are willing to be involved in consultancy, use their expertise and have them advertised, so that as problems come to us, we can match the problem solvers to the problems themselves. So I'd ask you just keep that in mind for the future if you're interested in the idea at all. Pardon me. So that's a little bit about what consultancy is and how to start finding it, but probably something I really want to focus on is how it works. A lot of things can be thought of as a black box, and demystifying is really important to do. So when I get asked how does consultancy work, my scripted joke answer is just easily. Really, we're here to take the hassle out of it, to make it really straightforward for everyone to work through. It's not difficult. It's not something you need to worry about. You can focus on delivery. The basis of the way we work is to deal with the background and admin side of things so that you can actually focus on using your expertise for that work, delivering to the client. So we'll deal with contracting, pricing, credit control, supplier setup, any of the back office side of things so that you don't need to worry about it. We'll always work with you to agree things, make sure that you're happy with the pricing. Ultimately, with consultancy work, we're not stuck to track rates, VEC rates, what have you. The key point is making sure that you, putting the time in, get value for that. And that can mean different things to different people, depending on, the pricing might be the key thing that matters to you, but it might be, it's the idea of that partnership and the follow-on onto, well, the example I gave before, onto a follow-on research project. So maybe a lower rate now for that future benefit is what's most important. So that's kind of how we support it flexibly, is probably the key word I'd focus on there. We've even gone to the point of being the bad guy in a relationship. If the client wants to try and negotiate rates down or change terms or something like that, you might want to keep that relationship with your contact. So point to us. We're the finance guys. We're the bad guys. Just say, no, they said we couldn't do that. And, we'll take the flak for it. But it means that it lets you foster that relationship further. And not to put too fine a point on it, but I'm sure most of you will have dealt with university contracting before, been aware of kind of how rigid things can be and the pace at which it can work. So I would point out that by doing consultancy, working through our subsidiary company, we can be a lot quicker to respond to things and have a lot more flexibility around contract negotiations and what can and can't be accepted, and make sure that we're all comfortable about what's going to happen. Ultimately, we can be as involved with things as you need to make things work. Flexibility on our part just makes things much smoother to run overall. If you remember the list of things I said I'd talk about, the financial benefits and the reward were number 4. A very important part of it. You're doing the work, you should get the reward. So coming back to the financial incentive is a major reason for consultancy work. You'll be able to see it in the consultancy policy, but our basic position is that we split the income generated on the following basis. So we have the income actually generated from the work, less any cost of delivery. So it might be travel, it might be subcontracting a part of it, what have you, to get to a net income figure. We'll then take that and then we split 15, 15, 70. So we retain 15% to cover our costs for providing service. 15% is paid to your school's budget, and that's an incentive for heads of schools to encourage staff to actually undertake consultancy work to try and boost that. Then the remaining 70% is yours to allocate as you wish. So it's very flexible. What we tend to see is that staff either take it into a Y account or a lab account to cover the lab costs, or for future academic purposes, unfunded conferences. If you save up enough, then you might need a postdoc to cover some research work, those kind of things. Or the other option is you can actually just take it directly through your university payroll. You're doing the work. You should be rewarded for it. That's the really important thing. And something that's not in the policy but is worth mentioning is that we improve those rates if it's larger projects that you get to. So if you have an oh, sorry, just some feedback, I think.
Yeah. What do you mean?
Something that's not in the policy is that if there's an individual project that's got a value over 30,000, then we change those percentages. So we retain 10, school gets 10, but you get 80% rather than 70%. It's just that it's that incentivization just to push for larger things, and the recognition that you're the one putting the extra work in. It's not necessarily more work for us as your project scales, but it's more work for you. and you should get more reward for that. And the final point is that I'll talk about is just about getting started. Every opportunity is different and needs a slightly different approach. So really all I'd say that is, if you think you have a consultancy opportunity, something you want to take forward, just get in touch with me. It's straightforward as that, and I can help you through things. I'll say again, Kira will be sharing contact details at the end. We'll guide you through the process, be as flexible, give you the right level of support that you want, you know, hands on, hands off, whatever is best for you. And we'll get you through things. I'm conscious that, you know, no one just wants to listen to me witter. As I said at the start, I'm a chartered accountant. I'm conscious that people find me incredibly dull. So, you know, I've spoken for about 15 minutes, and that's probably more than anyone can suffer through. So I'll just summarize quickly. Consulting gives you an option to generate income you'll directly benefit from. If there's no novel IP, chances are it'll be a consultancy piece of work rather than research. We aim to make it easy for you dealing with the admin, so you focus on delivery. And if you have an opportunity, just get in touch with me, ask the question, and we'll help you through it as easily as we can. So thank you for your time and listening to me. I don't know if Sarah's joined yet. She did have teaching commitments, but I'm not sure if she's actually joined the call.
I'm here.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. Sorry, I hadn't looked to the people yet. 65 we're up to. So that's fantastic. So I will pass over to Sarah now, who will talk about her experiences and how she's worked through consultancy and her Spire organisation. I think she's got some slides to share, so Kira should have set her up to present. And I'll put myself on mute. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Kira. And thanks to you all, actually, for being here. I have got some slides. I'm not as bold as Joe. I wasn't brave enough to go slide free. So, as Joe said at the start, my name is Sarah Marsden. I am the director of the Handler Centre for the Study of Terrorism and Political Violence here in the School of International Relations at St Andrews. And I also lead Spire, which is Security Practice, Insight, Research and Education. And we first started developing Spire a little over 2 years ago. And the aim was really to bridge the gap between research and policy and practice. So what we wanted to do was provide more avenues for us to bring research into practice. And that was really to meet a growing need for both academic research and insight to address contemporary security challenges, internationally, nationally and locally. Thematically then, we focus on terrorism and political violence, violent extremism, but in particular violence prevention, as well as civil society responses to violence and insecurity. And so Spire is the mechanism by which we've been trying to meet those needs. So talking a little bit more about why we thought this was a good idea and what kinds of needs we thought Spire could meet, really there were three different kinds of needs. And these emerged through our normal day-to-day research, leadership in the university, teaching and so on. So the first need that we encountered was the need for independent academic oversight and insight to support policymakers, to support practitioners, to support civil society actors. The security space that we operate in and we do our research in is pretty fast moving. And that can mean sometimes that policy making and practice is quite reactive, it's quite responsive to needs. And that means that it doesn't always have the chance to draw on existing knowledge or really clearly identify the kinds of insights that would enable ethical, effective and timely responses to different sorts of issues that emerged. So what Spire does is provide a structure for that. It provides the kind of academic insight that enables different kinds of stakeholders to take a more evidence-based approach to their work. So that's really the core need, and that emerged, as I say, through our existing relationships with different sorts of stakeholder communities. The second need, which is common in higher education, was particularly from our PhDs and our early career researchers. They, of course, are always looking for paid opportunities. They wanted to gain experience of working in the field. And so I was thinking a lot about how to enable that, how to create the context for people to benefit from the work that we do in the university. And then the final need that Spire really spoke to was to generate more routes for our research to serve the public good. Most of our work, certainly speaking for myself, is quite impact oriented anyway. It's focused on thinking about how research can be brought into practice to meet emerging needs. But the research funding model didn't always allow us to maximise that impact. And Spire creates a space for us to do that. It allows us to really foreground impact generating work and the community building which enables it. So that's really why I thought it was a good idea to start a separate organisation which allowed us to meet those needs. And we do that in a number of different ways. So there are different kinds of services that we provide. So we provide consultancy and advisory services. So these are sort of, if you like, standard kind of consulting routes. Let's say that there's a new policy idea that people want input on, or there's a different sort of model or tool that's being developed and they would benefit from external independent advice and insight, then we will do that in order to really try and enhance evidence-informed policy and practice in our area. We also do carry out knowledge production work, but this is where it doesn't necessarily fit into a traditional research model. So this might be very applied kind of monitoring and evaluation work, really applied research, answering very specific kinds of questions, which, as I say, is less well enabled via the sort of traditional research funding routes that we might apply for. We also do quite a bit of knowledge synthesis and knowledge transfer. So this is obviously bringing together insights from the existing evidence base, but also working with different stakeholders to translate that and to help them see the benefits and the knowledge that might exist in the academic space and how that then relates to their work in the real world, if you like. And then the final stream, and Joe mentioned this, is around training and CPD. And this is an area that we're developing at the moment to really try and develop and deliver bespoke training. And that, of course, aims to build capacity, it aims to build knowledge within different kinds of stakeholder and policy and practice communities. So that's what we do. Our approach, though, is we think sort of quite distinctive, and there are a few elements of our approach which I'll just talk us through. So the first is that we work in really collaborative ways. We are committed to participatory approaches, to co-design, to working with partners, both to try and understand their needs, but also, of course, to co-develop solutions that help address those needs. So what that means is we really foreground community building and foreground relationships, the relationships that we already hold and value, but also extending those relationships and extending those communities. So we have started less with what kinds of commercial interests or market opportunities might there be, and instead asked a question about what does the community that we're already part of need? And what kind of relationships do we have that could enable us to better understand those needs and meet them through independent evidence and academic insight? The second element is that we don't only respond to stakeholders' needs, because we also hope to try and shape some of the agendas that exist in our space. So we want to try and both respond to those needs, but also shape research policy and practice and the landscape that they function in by providing insight that's informed by the most up-to-date research, but of course always informed by the understanding that's nurtured through those long-term relationships. And finally, although we're not formally a legal entity yet, we do work principally on a social enterprise basis. So this means to say that the income that we derive obviously meets core costs, staff, travel, and so on, but we also use that to support the delivery of work which, in practical terms, prevents or counters the causes of terrorism and violence and mitigates their effects. But what that means in very practical terms is that we might deliver free training. We might give free advice or consultancy work to, for example, third sector organisations that can't necessarily afford to pay for the work that we might deliver. So the aim is that we derive income from organisations which can afford to pay for those services, and that gives us more resource and capacity to then deliver that pro bono to organisations which wouldn't ordinarily be able to benefit from it. So what we want to try and do through all of that is really strengthen the relationships and the links between academia, policy and practice, as well as building capacity across those communities so they're better equipped to draw on academic research so they can do their work in more ethical and effective ways. So the model that I tend to think about when I sort of have developed, I suppose, an overview of what we do and how we do it, is really for research to drive a lot of this. So a lot of what we do starts with the research work that we do, and through that we develop opportunities to feed into impact. So both because the impact agenda obviously matters to our institutions, but also because intrinsically from a values point of view, it really matters to us that our work does make a difference and is reaching the people it needs. So the relationships that we develop and the income that we derive drives the impact, but it also allows us to give back, as I mentioned. So we can afford to give pro bono or subsidised support to community-based organisations, for example. And of course, through that, we aim to provide opportunities for employment for our students, for our early career researchers and our PhD students. They get employment, they get paid, and they get the experience and the support that they benefit from, hopefully, as they go on and develop their careers. And of course, all of that in turn informs our research, because it gives us a really direct, unmediated understanding of the sorts of needs that are emerging in the field, and which then, of course, we can apply for more standard research funding to help address. It also feeds into our teaching. I draw on the work that we do in our classrooms. I invite some of the people we collaborate with to speak to our students. So our students have got a sense of some of the practical work that goes on in the field when they graduate. And in some cases, that's even led to employment opportunities. So over time, the idea is to really nurture this virtuous cycle where research informs impact, allows us to pursue wider social goods, but also informs our teaching, all the while providing opportunities for our students and our PhDs. And at the heart of all of that are the communities that we develop through our work and through the relationships that we've derived. So in terms of where we are now, we're about 2 years in. The first year was very much sort of feeling our way and getting a sense of what was possible, what support was available. So we really sort of, if you like, soft launched about a year ago. And since then, we've secured some support from the university. So that includes the university underwriting a 2-year research fellowship position, which has allowed us to really get kick-started. That role is not free. We have to obviously support that with funding, but it has given us the chance to undertake research and development work, and that will run until May 2026. And I'm so pleased to say that we've also had some runs on the board in terms of funding and work. So over the last couple of years, we've secured around £220,000 in funding, and that's from different organisations. I think 7 or 8 organisations have funded our work, and that's everything from government, from, let's say, the UK Home Office, overseas government, so the American government, also Public Safety Canada, also in North America, as well as the Scottish Government has also funded some of our work, and also centres which mediate funding. So, for instance, CREST we've been funded by, which is CREST is an ESRC funded centre. It stands for the Centre for Research and Evidence on Security Threats, and it's really the hub for applied security focused research in the UK. We've also been fortunate enough to be successful with 2 applications to the University Impact and Innovation Fund, which we're really appreciative of. And because of the communities and the relationships and the networks we've got, we've also been able to match fund that support. So we've got, let's say, £15,000 from the Impact Innovation Fund, but we've also matched that with another £20,000 from Public Safety Canada, from CREST, for example. We've benefited massively from working with our PhD students. So 4 of my PhDs have worked with us, 3 postdocs have worked, 1 full-time, 2 part-time, as well as some of our master's students who are also working on some of this. And all that has enabled us to draw together the outline of an impact case study, which would be hopefully considered by the school when it gets to that point. And more importantly, I think underpinning all of this is that we've engaged in quite a lot of community building. So we've tried to develop the context for Spire to grow. So our aim is to keep nurturing all of that and to develop the relationships with our existing stakeholders as well as developing new ones. That might sound a little bit abstract, so I'm just going to take a couple of minutes, if it's okay, Joe, to just talk through one of the projects that we are working on and which is really important to us. And it really hopefully gives an example of the kind of work that we've done and is a priority area for us to work on over the coming months and years. So the programme of work, broadly defined, its ambition is to really make all aspects of security policy and practice trauma informed. And this is informed by a 4-year programme of research funded by the normal routes on trauma and violent extremism. So that's been funded by ESRC, by other stakeholders as well. And it involves an international multi-sector collaboration of researchers, practitioners, policymakers who are interested in understanding how to think in trauma-informed ways in what can be, of course, deeply traumatising contexts. So through that, we've developed a model, TRIM, the Strength and Trauma Informed Model, and it's really a model for interpreting why people engage in violent extremism and terrorism. And its aim is to structure risk assessment and threat assessment, but also to support intervention planning. So trying to support those who are trying to divert people away from extremist spaces. And it could also be used in terms of monitoring and evaluation. So that STRIM model really aims to try and meet what's quite an urgent need in a practitioner context to develop new ways of undertaking this kind of work that can support risk assessment and intervention programming. That approach has been incorporated into practice already in Canada, I'm pleased to say, and also the Scottish Government commissioned us to deliver some sessions on that work to different policymakers and practitioners in Scotland. That, I'm pleased to say, has now turned into a community of practice for trauma-informed approaches, which will be formally launching next month in Scotland with the Scottish Government. All of that has enabled new research. So the collaborations that we've developed with different government stakeholders are actually allowing us to test and to build the evidence base for the model, and hopefully explore its capacity to help practitioners and, of course, to help those who find themselves involved in extremist spaces. And we've also been invited to train that to practitioners in Germany, Canada, Norway and elsewhere. We've also been successful, and I think we might be, I'm not sure, one of the first from SHAPE disciplines to be successful with an innovation funding bid to St Andrews to support the rollout of a training programme, and that would provide guidance and support for people who wanted to use this model. So that's a kind of a practical example, I guess, of how research has informed the impact. We've benefited massively from working with our students and our PhDs and our postdocs on it, as well as hopefully driving impact into the practitioner spaces that we engage with. My final slide is to sort of just this opportunity really prompted me to think about, well, what's helped us get here? There's a very long way to go, and there have been lots of challenges, which of course I'm happy to answer questions about. But thinking about the things that really helped us get to this stage, the first is the foregrounding of community. So creating the context and being part of a multi-sector community of people who work in this space has been really important. And that includes, of course, valuing the relationships we've got and developing genuine reciprocity in those relationships. These people are important to us, and hopefully we are also important to the folks that we work with too. So it also, as well as working with the people we already know, it also involves building communities where they mightn't exist. So just by way of another example, we secured a very modest amount of funding from the university to develop something called the Pax Caledonia Network, which is a multi-sector network for practitioners, policymakers and researchers in Scotland particularly, who work on security, counter-terrorism, counter-extremism, very broadly defined. And through that, the aim is that we'll map the needs of that community and create the context to meet those needs through research, through our engagement and through that community building. So that's really helped us. Foregrounding community and relationships has mattered a great deal, and it makes it more authentic and more rewarding as we move through building different programs of work. The second thing that's helped is seeking out support, first from our immediate community of colleagues, from our students, our PhDs and ECRs, but also from the university. Joe, for all his modesty, has been exceptionally helpful with contracting, with invoicing, with general advice, and as I cannot underline enough how responsive and flexible Joe and his team have been supporting us as we've been developing our ideas. So that support is massively helpful, and as Joe said, the flexibility that affords is also really helpful when you're working in different sorts of structures and systems outside of standard research funding landscape. And the last thing that's really helped has been being really clear about the values that drive the work that we do. The security space obviously invites ethical reflection on the kind of work we do, and the values that drive Spire, which for us are community, integrity, collaboration and contribution, help us make choices about the kind of work we do, who we collaborate with, under what conditions, and it also guides us while we're delivering the work. So hopefully that's given a kind of a real world example of the kind of work that Joe has certainly enabled for us, and the things that have helped us as we've been developing Spire over the last year to 18 months. I'm happy to answer any questions, but we'll pass back to Joe and Kira for now.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm glad I had my camera off there because you probably would have seen me blush otherwise. I think that was fantastic. It really gives a good example of how the abstract that I talked about actually comes into practice. So thank you again.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. That was a brilliant session. We're happy to welcome any questions. If you have any, just pop them in the chat and we can read them out to Joe and Sarah. Great. We've got our first question. So a question for you, Sarah. Sounds like the boundaries between research and entrepreneurial activity in Spire are more fluid than I originally imagined. In your experience, does this mean flexibility or does it mean confusion and delays in making decisions?
Thanks, Rita. Thanks for the question. I see this as a massive opportunity in terms of increased flexibility. So, as Joe mentioned, the research funding landscape is often quite rigid. It's often not, it often doesn't invite the kind of creativity and the innovation that perhaps a consultancy route allows. So for me, it's allowed a lot more flexibility for the work that we do and the way that we do that work and the way that we work with different stakeholders too. So it allows us to have more open conversations. It allows us to be more flexible on pricing. And so, you are mindful then, of course, of who you're working with. So if you're working with a community-based organisation, you wouldn't think about charging or the same sort of charging structure as you would if you were working for a government organisation. So that affords a great deal of flexibility. And because Joe and his team are so responsive, there's very, very few delays. I mean, when I say responsive, I cannot underline it enough. Our wider university structures are often under a lot of pressure. I'm sure Joe is as well, but he has always been incredibly responsive, both to telling us, is this an opportunity that we can pursue through consultancy routes? And so if I'm not certain, if I see an opportunity and it might sit outside our normal research funding frameworks that we typically apply to, I just say to Joe, is this something we can apply for via the consultancy, via Spire? And Joe will look at it through the terms and conditions, let me know, typically within a few hours, and then I can make a decision as to whether we want to pursue that or not and how we might want to do it. I think having a kind of a separate entity has allowed me then to set out a business plan and to gain the support of the school to some degree and the wider university. So I suppose in that sense, it's sort of a case of setting out the parameters of what we do first and then allowing us to pursue opportunities that fit within those parameters. And if there are things that sit outside it, then of course I'd ask for advice and support as necessary. So for me, it's created speed, efficiency and flexibility.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Our next question is, are PGRs allowed to join the expert bank?
Simple answer, yes. Yeah, so as I said, the expert bank is something we really want to develop so that we can actually have a clear understanding of what's on offer. I mean, the challenge for me, as I said, I'm a chartered accountant. I'm not a technical scientist. I'm not a policy expert. I'm limited in my field. So a lot of the detail of what we need would come from people who want to join that expert bank to say, my experts are language learning models. My expertise are chemical catalysis and organic chemistry, those kind of things, and the projects that you're interested in, want to be involved in. I mean, if you wanted to send me details of what your experience and expertise are, then absolutely we could start that. And sorry, I just realized Kirsty sent a follow-up question there saying, is there a link to sign up to the expert bank? Not yet, but I think that's going to need to be a priority.
Great, thank you, Joe. Next from Kirsty says, it sounds like new knowledge is created as a result of Spire. Does that tip it out of consultancy and back into research?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kirsty. So, I mean, the sort of short answer is yes, but I tend to take as flexible a reading of that as I possibly can. So the consultancy work is often oriented around obviously delivering certain things. It might be reports, it could be different kinds of deliverables, knowledge synthesis and so on. That's the formal delivery as far as I understand it in terms of the consultancy route, and that meets our contractual obligations, if you like. The research then that is enabled through that sometimes can be funded. So the work that we've done has certainly enabled us to apply for formal research funding to support different projects, but also there's sort of unfunded research, if you like. So the relationships that we've got have allowed us to test some of the ideas that we've developed in the consultancy space, but do that in collaboration with our partners in ways which sort of sit outside the formal consultancy delivery model that we would have been contracted for, but then allows us to do that research work that sits outside it. And of course, then we can publish from that, and then that creates proof of concept for further research funding. So it is a slightly blurry line. Joe keeps me honest and straight in terms of what's possible, but provided from, as far as I understand it, and Joe, you can correct me, so long as the consultancy brief and contractual obligations are met, then the work that sits outside of that can then sort of fall more into a research kind of space.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is, does the consultancy support extend to non-academic and research staff?
Yes, absolutely. Again, the flexibility is the key thing. Effectively, if you've got an employment contract with the university, then you can undertake staff consultancy. Within the tech transfer team, as a support service, we actually have someone who does provide consultancy services to one of the other Scottish universities. So prime example of, yeah, your skills are applicable, transferable, and can be put forward.
Our next question is for you, Sarah. Is Spire registered as a separate company managed by the university or a research centre?
Thanks for the question. It's neither at the moment. So it's a little bit fluid. What it is concretely is a cost code. So that's its sort of formal sort of structure at the moment. So it sits outside of CSTPV, where obviously, which is a research centre that I lead in the school, but it doesn't yet exist as a separate social enterprise. That's what we're working towards. So at the moment, having a sort of a separate identity for it, both in terms of visual identity or, you know, kind of the work that we do around it, but also having that cost code allows us to obviously manage our budget, making sure that we can pay the people that are doing the work for us, and keeping that work kind of bounded and managed. And Joe obviously is really helpful in supporting and enabling that. Our ambition would be to be a formal social enterprise, so that we sort of spin off and would have registered identity and be registered as a legal entity. So that would be our sort of medium-term ambition. And if anybody is interested, we've also been working in a social enterprise in particular. We've been working and benefiting from insight and support from Venture Labs, which is an organisation funded by Scottish Government to support social enterprises right across the piece, but including in university contexts. And so they're always asking exactly the same question: where do you want to grow to? What do you envisage Spire being? And I think for me, I would like it to be a social enterprise, a B Corp company, which has its own sort of standalone identity.
Great, thank you. Our next question asks, what would your advice be to schools wanting to promote their expertise as a school? Is the expert bank based on individuals or groups? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of setting up entities like Spire?
That's a big question. What I would suggest is first getting in touch with your director of impact for the school. They can be instrumental in support, and having the conversation about what, you know, they might have some views upon how they want to actually take things forward, or they might have the networks to actually start taking things forward as well. And I'd also be happy to talk to them, I should also say, and to figure out what's best and most appropriate for each school as it works. The expert bank, ideally, I think it would be based upon the groupings and the sector or sector expertise or industry expertise, rather than individuals. That's probably likely to have a greater impact. I mean, there's always going to be the case of, you know, world leaders, as I mentioned earlier, at the university who companies literally find them because they're Googling that person and want their specific advice. But if we were offering to the market, we would probably have advertising based upon sector skills and areas. But the alternative would be that if we went out and found companies and had our partnerships with them, brought in problems, then we might be better placed to go to individuals and say, you know, you have the expertise in X, Y, Z. On the advantages and disadvantages of Spire, Sarah, I don't know if you want to tag team this or if you want to talk a little bit how you found working in the fluid space as you have right now.
Yeah, thanks, Alexander. I think it depends on almost sort of which perspective you're coming at it from. If you're coming at it from a school perspective, I could probably offer some insights. But from my personal point of view, in terms of the advantages, it affords the extra flexibility and allows us to work with more partners. It allows us to work in a more responsive way in industry and in the sorts of spaces that we operate in, typically in terms of the wider community of practice that we're part of. They often demand much more responsive and timely responses to their needs, which can't necessarily wait for 6 to 9 months until a funding application has been successful. And so they are prepared then to pay for that kind of insight up front, if you like. And so it's more flexible. For disadvantages, it really depends on how I think the school that you're in sees the benefits of this kind of work. At the moment, this is all on top of my normal workload. And so it is not accommodated by, for instance, the workload model. That is a disadvantage because obviously you're essentially working on top of your full teaching, research and admin load. But I think it depends on how your school approaches this kind of work and how it wants to, because I don't think that's the case across all schools. So I think on the one hand, flexibility, responsivity, allowing us to work in more collaborative ways with wider groups of stakeholders. On the disadvantage side, it's a lot of work, and I think if that kind of work is not accommodated by the system, and of course from a social enterprise point of view, I'm not deriving income from this, so all the income that is derived is put back into Spire. And so although as Joe rightly says, when you do the work, you deserve the reward, in this case, of course, because we're working on a different model, that's not the case. And so everything is really sort of, it accretes on top of the work that is already part of your normal workload. That's very much somebody on the coalface's point of view. From a school perspective, I think you probably need to ask either the DOI or head of school.
Great, thank you. Next question from Michael is, your service of focusing on the admin, can you give some examples of this support?
That's fairly straightforward. Name a dull task and I'll probably do it for you. It can come down to something as simple as, Sarah brought up earlier, the figuring out whether something would qualify as consultancy or research. Following on from that, it's open discussions with the client about getting set up. Most of you won't have had the joy of trying to go through supplier setup procedures, justifying who you are, providing evidence. When you have to give like your passport and a copy proof of address, there's a bit like that with most companies that you work with, just to prove who you are. And it can take quite a long time. Then it can move on to the contracting process. So rather than you read through a 20, 30, 40 plus page contract, I'll do that for you. Make sure there's nothing that's going to trip you up, catch you out, or if there's anything that I think maybe you want to be aware of that, but maybe you're okay with it, I'll work with you on that and the negotiation for some of those terms that we maybe want to change. The pricing aspect of things, we can work through pricing models based upon what's fair, what's market value, and what the value to the client actually is. And then, as I say, ultimately make sure that you're comfortable with what that pricing is. Following on from that, get to the final steps, contract signed. Up to that point, you've basically said what you want, and I've tried to get that for you. Then you're free to do the work. We deal with the invoicing, we deal with the collection of the funds from the client, we deal with any taxes, such simple ones, VAT. Behind that, we make sure the funds are then transferred back to the university into the correct code that you've asked us to put them into, or into your payroll. So that's kind of the whole journey from start to end, assuming it works smoothly. There's always hiccups here or there that we try and solve for you as well, but that's broadly what we do. We take all that dull part of things just to leave you to focus on actually delivering to the client of what they're looking for.
Great, thank you. Another question for you, Joe. For consultancy opportunities that involves an industry partner and research with IP potential, what is the starting point for involving the research faculty? Is it through your team, or should we contact them directly to get their feedback?
So if you think there's going to be some IP involved, some generation of IP that would probably tend towards being research, then if you contacted me, I'll get in touch with RBD and loop you in. If you've contacted RBD, they'll take a view on things. There are always going to be some sort of grey areas, and we just come down to what seems like the most beneficial route forward. So we have a good working relationship with RBD. We discuss things, and between either my team or their team, we'll reach a point to say we think this should sit here, and then we'll move forward with that route. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm ambivalent as to who you contact. You'll get the right answer.
Great, thank you. Is there any final questions for Joe and Sarah during the session today? Any questions do pop up into your mind afterwards. Like Joe and I have said previously, I will be sharing contact details for both Joe and Sarah, so feel free to reach out to them directly. Great. If there's no more questions, happy to finish the session. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us, and thank you to Joe and Sarah for your insightful session. It's been brilliant. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Right. Thank you all so much, and thank you again to Sarah for participating as well.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Lovely. Right.